show you a short video. Which is freely available from CITV website. A, to put you in the picture, and B, because it's a resource that you might want to use to start people on the journey to explain to them about CDM regulations.
The new Construction, Design and Management Regulations 2015, or CDM regs, come into force on the 6th of April. They're the main regulations for managing the health, safety and welfare on all construction projects and define responsibilities according to particular roles. The main roles are client, designers, contractors. And where there's more than one contractor, there are additional roles of principal designer and principal contractor. On large projects, the client is responsible for making sure the principal designer and principal contractor carry out their duties. The principal designer ensures that health and safety is considered during the planning phase of a project, including identifying, eliminating or minimising foreseeable health and safety risks. On small domestic projects, including home improvements, the client's responsibilities are normally transferred to the contractor, without the client really needing to know much about it. Construction phase plans. Under the new regulations, all construction work must have a construction phase plan drawn up before work starts. The plan should reflect the project's size and nature of risk, so simple jobs only need a simple plan. All contractors must ensure their workers have the right skills, knowledge, training and experience to do their job and provide appropriate levels of information, instruction and supervision. If you are the principal contractors, you must also provide a site induction for all workers, secure the site and provide welfare facilities from the start of the job. More information, including the industry guidance for each duty holder and a free CDM app to help prepare construction phase plans for small projects, are available to download at citv.co.uk/CDM-regs.
Okay, I'm going to cover the things that haven't changed very quickly, and then I'll spend more time focusing on the principal designer and client duties later on. We're working. So, in the UK, Nate, do you think you bring that other microphone up, please? In the UK, some research done by recently was showing 245 million deaths in the UK, 14,000 of those are accident, 300 in the workplace, and then patient mental health, 4,000 on jobs. Can I see you? So, occupational health, we're talking about 8,000 workers a day. So, if you were thinking that construction industry it's a dangerous place because people fall from height. We lose about 26 people a year who fall from height, 40 odd in deaths, accidental deaths, but the ill health is the thing that we need to be focusing on. And in the construction industry, 3/4 of the time lost is to ill health, and you'll be familiar with this. This is construction industry specific. Asbestos, these are registrations, not deaths. Registrations in 2004. Asbestos silicosis is actually the second biggest cause of death in the construction industry. Painters and decorators as a group, the agency suggested that maybe it was a latency issue, but recently they've said that that may not be the case, that in fact maybe still causes for concerns with the things that painters and decorators use. And diesel engine exhaust, which you'll know from the last campaign, is a killer in the UK construction industry. And other things that cause ill health, some cause death. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, general dusts, UKCG, United Kingdom Contractors Group, are running a campaign to ban brooms and brushes from construction sites. So it'll all be vacuumed up. You can control it by wetting it, you can control it by not creating a reverse instance, but there's always some dust. Dermatitis and MSDs predominantly construction, bricklayers, and then hand-on vibration syndrome. So CDM, it has always been, and it continues to be, about construction workers. If you're doing something, someone's asked you to do something, and you can't see the link between what you're doing and how you're going to protect the well-being of the construction worker, you're probably doing something you don't need to do. Right? Because it's all about protecting construction workers. As well as the regulations, we've got the HSE guidance, L153, and then we've got the industry guidance, which is all on the CITB website, and this coloured C shape comes from the covers of the industry guidance. So construction workers, not a duty holder on the regulations, but there is a regulation that does require them to look out for their own health and safety, those of others, and to report anything that's causing them concerns. Obviously, we would want them to engage in the consultation process. The principal contractor has an obligation to ensure there's an adequate consultation and to cooperate with other workers. Simple and straightforward, the same as it was before. Contractors, again, their responsibilities haven't changed. Largely, there is one responsibility, which I'll talk about in a minute. So plan, manage and monitor their own work. Prepare and update the construction phase plan. This is a new obligation on all construction sites. There's to be a construction phase plan. I forgot to say, by the way, CDM does apply in England and Scotland as well as in Wales. Construction phase plan on all projects, proportionate, of course, to the level of risk. The problem with the video is it talks about size and not risk, and it's not particularly accurate about the client's duties, but it's a great overview to get people started. Construction phase plan, the HSE did a busy builder sheet. If you're not aware of the busy builder sheets, then they're on the HSE's website. There are about 10 or 12 of them. They're great little two-sided documents that tell contractors what they need to do. So if you're struggling with a small contractor, then you could point them to the busy builder sheets. And then recently they did a busy builder sheet on what the construction phase plan would look like, and then CITB effectively turned that into an app. So they can download an app. It's very well received, 900 downloads I've had so far, and quite a lot of university students are using it as a learning tool, as well as some construction workers as well. So they have to prepare a construction phase plan. One wrinkle, the regulations say they have to draw up or arrange to be drawn up a construction phase plan. So you might go to a site to do an inspection shortly after the work started and say, where's your construction phase plan? And the smart contractor might say, well, I phoned Bob last Thursday and asked him to do one for me. It hasn't arrived yet, but I have made arrangements for one to be drawn up. Okay? I'm not sure the contractor's that smart, but it's a possible wrinkle that's out there. Provide welfare, we see this is passed on to the principal contractor where there is a principal contractor, but it's the individual contractor's obligation to ensure that their workers have got adequate welfare facilities. Secure the site. Again, if there's a principal contractor, the principal contractor will do that, but if not, then it's the contractor's responsibilities. Provide an induction. As normally done by the principal contractor where there is one, and cooperate and coordinate with other contractors. As I say, apart from the construction phase plan, it's the same as their obligations before. The one thing that has gone missing, however, is the provision of information for the health and safety file. There was an obligation under CDM 2007 for them to provide information for the file, and because it was written in statute, we tended not to write it in contract, because that's the way the legal profession work. Now it's no longer in statute. If you don't write it in contract, then the contractor would say, well, where's my obligation to provide this information? So you just need to be careful that that's covered. Principal contractor are the same as their duties under the CDM 2007 regs. Plan, manage and monitor the construction phase, coordinate health and safety. Prepare and update a construction phase plan, make arrangements for it to be done to secure the site, provide welfare, provide an induction, ensure that there's cooperation and coordination between all of the contractors, which is in essence the focal part of the principal contractor's responsibility. The directive calls them the execution phase safety and health coordinator, because the role is all about coordination. Consult with the workforce. The obligation of the CDM 2007 has just been lifted straightforward. It's something that contractors don't do very well. They talk about having an open door policy, but open door policy isn't consultation. An open door policy requires the worker to take the initiative, whereas the regulations require the principal contractor to take the initiative, insurance consultation. And where the principal designer disappears, and we'll talk about that in a minute, they have to finish the health and safety file and issue it. Again, a potential source for disagreement. The principal designer, say, disappears off the project 6 weeks from the end of the project. He hands the health and safety file over to the principal contractor to finish, and it's a blank document. And the principal contractor says, well, I haven't allowed any resources to do this, or I expected it to be much more developed than it is at the moment. And so there's something for clients to think about how you're going to manage that process. And it might be that you want to retain the principal designer to complete the health and safety file, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So largely unchanged responsibilities, except many, many more principal contractors. Historically, we had principal contractors where the project was notifiable. Now we have principal contractors where there's more than one contractor on site. And more than one contractor at any time. So it doesn't have to be more than one contractor simultaneously. So a developer, for example, could buy a brownfield site. They get one contractor to demolish the building. That contractor goes off site. He could get another contractor to come along and do a ground remediation to add value to the plot before we sell it on. So that's a separate contractor at a separate time, but the client would still have to appoint a principal contractor because it's a more than one contractor project. And I would say that most projects would fall into that more than one contractor project category. So the archetypal domestic client, and I'm not going to talk in detail about domestic clients, but if you want to, you can ask a question later on. The archetypal domestic client is Mrs. Miggins, and she's always having her bathroom done. Mrs. Miggins' bathroom usually involves 3 or 4 contractors. So a multi-contractor project. You've got the general builder, you've got the plumber, and the electrician. Some contractors are multi-skilled. So, for example, Love Respond would tend not to subcontract work because they're multi-skilled operatives who come in, and so it's a single contractor project. The biggest single contractor project I found is a Swedish house. Apparently, if you buy a Swedish house, they prepare the site, they do the foundations, then they bring the house over in containers, they build it and they fit it out, and it's a single contractor project. And therefore, the client wouldn't have to appoint a principal contractor because it's a single contractor project. But most projects are going to be multi-contractor projects and require their clients to appoint a principal designer, principal contractor and principal designer as well. Designer's duties are the same as they were under CDM 2007, except the wording's been changed slightly. So under CDM 2007, designers had to eliminate hazards and reduce risks. Under CDM 2015, they have to eliminate risks and reduce risks. Right? For those of us who wear an anorak, I think that's probably everybody in this room, we understand the difference between hazard and risk, but the regulations, I guess, were aimed at your three designer practice and Barry and Edmonds. They don't have to understand the difference, so they have to eliminate risk or reduce risk. But then the regulations ask them to then control risk. We've had a long debate about this in various fora, because under CDM 2007 we had the acronym ERIC, Eliminate, Reduce, Provide Information and Control. It was generally accepted that designers didn't control risk. That was an employer-employee responsibility. But now designers have to control risk through the subsequent design process. At the ICE Health and Safety Panel, we were discussing what this was. A student pointed out that it must mean something, otherwise it wouldn't be there. That's not just a word that's crept in by mistake, so it must mean something. It certainly doesn't mean employer-employee, because you wouldn't expect the designers to go out and start controlling construction workers, so it must mean something else. One of the contractors on the panel said, well, if we're left with if we're building a floor, for example, on a new building, and we had a leading edge, we would control that risk by putting in temporary barriers, which you absolutely would. But the designer doesn't. If the designer does something like that with their design, they're carrying on reducing risk. So we're all a bit confused. The HSE haven't been able to answer that question when we've asked it, what does this control mean? So one must assume that it's something about carrying on reducing risk. Take account of the general principles of prevention and the pre-construction information. So under CDM 2007, there were 4 core duties that applied to all duty holders. Regulations 4, 5, 6 and 7, competence, cooperation, coordination, and the application of the general principles of prevention. To make the regulations more accessible, the HSE has moved those core duties into the individual duty holders' responsibilities. So the idea is that you can pick up the regulations, you can say, I'm a designer, you can look at Regulation 9, and all your duties are in Regulation 9. Unfortunately, that's not quite possible, because Regulation 8 applies to all duty holders, and we'll see what Regulation 8 is in it. So take account of the general principles of prevention and the pre-construction information. The RIBA, in their submission on the consultation document, said that you could get rid of the obligation on designers to look at the general principles of prevention because it didn't apply to them, which seemed a bit of a strange position to take. Pre-construction information, again, I would say that designers would think that that's for the contractor, identifying risks that the contractor has to manage, and some of it surely is risk that the contractor has to manage, but there's also something in there in the pre-construction information that the designers have to take account of. And this duty is an absolute duty. So it's must take account of the general principles of prevention and the pre-construction information. There's been a lot of talk from the Health and Safety Executive, and it has been said that all of the designer's duties are qualified duties, but this one isn't. It says that they must take account of the general principles of prevention and the pre-construction information. Just as under CDM 2007, they have to address 5 classes of people: people carrying out construction work, people affected by construction work, people cleaning the structure, people maintaining the structure, and people using the structure as a workplace. In CDM 2007, those were A to E. In CDM 2015, they're A, B, and C. So people carrying out construction work, people affected by construction work have been combined together into A. People cleaning and maintaining have been combined together into B. People using the structure as a workplace is in C. I thought that obligation would disappear. It was something that had been introduced in the 2007 regulations to assist the occupier of the building to address their obligations under the workplace health, safety and welfare regulations. And it's disappeared from parts of the regulations, but it still exists as a group of people that the designers have to address. But it's much less explicit than it was in CDM 2015, but they're still there. And construction workers is not only the people who are engaged in the current project, of course, it's people who are doing subsequent work in the building in construction projects and ultimately in the end demolishing the building. They're all construction workers that the designers have to think about when they're doing their design. They have to provide information, just as they did under the old regulations. The standard for that information is the same as before. It's significant risk. So not likely to be obvious to a competent contractor, unusual or difficult to manage effectively is the definition of significant risk, and that's contained in the glossary to the regulation. Strangely, as well as providing information, they have to ensure that there is relevant information in the health and safety file. This seems to be a duplication. Again, they've written it twice, so you must assume that it's something extra, I suppose. And there's a suggestion that maybe designers should be reviewing the health and safety file before it's issued to make sure that the relevant information they want to communicate to future contractors is contained in the health and safety file. It's a qualified duty, so maybe they could say, well, I gave the information to the principal designer, it was the principal designer's responsibility to produce the health and safety file, therefore I have done that so far as reasonably practical. So that's designer's duties, to say not a massive change, slight nuancing of the obligations under CDM 2015. The new role under the regulations is the principal designer. In the draft of L153 in Table 1, it said the principal designer replaces the CDM coordinator, and in the published version of L153 in Table 1, it says the principal designer does not replace the CDM coordinator. So you've got to work that one out. Some things are the same, some things are different. In the lead up to the regulations, the HSE was struggling with why wasn't CDM coordination working? And they identified it was because the CDM coordinators were appointed late, they were under-resourced, and they weren't part of the team. And there were various ways of sorting that out. I think I would have sorted it out by prosecuting more clients, but I mean, I'm a big stick man, me. What they said is that in the execution, in the construction phase, coordination is undertaken by the contractor who is managing all the other contractors. So the main contractor, you remember, became the principal contractor. And they said that works really well. Therefore, they wanted to mirror that in the design phase. I would say from a European perspective, whilst design risk management in the UK is second to none compared with the rest of Europe, our execution phase coordination, i.e. the role of the principal contractor, isn't as good as the rest of Europe. It's something they do better than us. But anyway, the HSE latched themselves onto this model that the principal designer is the same as the principal contractor. The principal contractor looks at the construction phase, and the principal designer looks at the pre-construction phase. So the duties are the same: plan, manage and monitor, and coordinate health and safety in the pre-construction phase to ensure that the project is carried out without risks to health and safety. A subtle difference there: for the principal contractor, it's the construction phase is carried out without risks to health and safety, but with the principal designer, it's that the project is carried out without risks to health and safety. Therefore, you could say if a contractor loses a hand on site, a worker loses a hand on site, then there's a, yes, his employer may be culpable, the principal contractor will have his collar felt, but there's a route to go back to the principal designer and say, did you, so far as reasonably practical, plan, manage and monitor and coordinate health and safety so that during the pre-construction phase, so that the project was carried out without risks to health and safety? Whether the HSE ever want to go there, I don't know, but it's a possibility. Let's just sort out this pre-construction phase because there is some confusion about it. So we have a project. A project starts from project conception and finishes at project completion. We then have the pre-construction phase. The pre-construction phase is defined as a time when design or preparatory work is being carried out. And the pre-construction phase can start, it obviously starts at project inception, but it can go on till the end. Sometimes when you're reading L153, the drafter has written it as though the pre-construction phase and the construction phase are mutually exclusive. I've been in the industry 30 years. I know I don't know old enough. A little bit of support would be good there. And one project I worked on, we designed a Coast Guard station, we documented it, we put it on in a file, we put it on the shelf. And then 3 years later it was taken off the shelf and it was built. It was a Coast Guard station in a new city in the Middle East. That's the only project I've ever worked on where design has been complete before construction starts. So we've got the construction phase. The construction phase finishes at project completion, or shortly afterwards when the contractor's done his snagging. The construction phase can't start at inception. In my opinion, you can't have construction work until you've got some design. And L144, the old approved best practice, talked about the PFIs when developing the employer's requirements, there was responsibility for the CDM coordinator. So the construction phase can't start at inception, but it can start pretty quickly after that if the employer is going on a PFI or a design and construct route. And the two overlap. On 99.9% of projects, the two will overlap. And the agency acknowledge that. In the definitions, they define the pre-construction phase as design and preparatory work and acknowledge that it can overlap the construction phase. As I say, sometimes at L153, that doesn't seem to be written particularly clearly. The corollary to this is, of course, when design work finishes, design and preparatory work finishes, there's nothing for the principal designer to do. And that's when you get into the situation that they've developed a health and safety file, their role finishes, but the project isn't complete, and then they pass what they've done to the principal contractor, and the principal contractor closes out the health and safety file and issues it to the client. If you're a client, I would suggest it's more sensible for you to appoint the principal designer to the end of the construction phase, okay? And get them and commission them to complete the health and safety file. And that will save the argument over, what's a health and safety file? I open my template, I change the address of the client name, I do a save as, and that's a health and safety file. If I'm not particularly assiduous, I might save all the work to the last 2 weeks of the project. If my commission ends 6 weeks before the end of the project, that's all the health and safety file is. It's a number of headings, a number of flyers for the appendices, the client's name and the project address. You might be expecting something else, but that might be all that it is. So come back to the principal designer's duties. Plan, manage and monitor and coordinate health and safety in the pre-construction phase. Regulation 11.1. Manage the pre-construction information, just as the CDM coordinator used to do. I also have a webinar, the construction group organised a webinar. Anthony Lees, who was writing the regulations, or overseeing the writing of the regulations, talked about the regulations, and that's all he talked about. He talked about managing, anybody can manage information. Anybody can manage information. But to find the right information to manage. And he seemed to miss out design risk management, because that's what, for me, the principal designer role is about. It's about making sure that design hazards are eliminated during design and reduced. So the principal designer's duties is to identify, eliminate or control health and safety risk. Identify is not a problem. You sit down with the design team, you say you've got plant operatives going on the roof to maintain the plant. Have we thought about preventing them falling off? So you've identified the problem. Eliminate, in my world, eliminate is something that designers can do and that CDM coordinators can't do, because they're not part of the design team usually. If they're a designer as well, they can do it in their role as a designer, but not in their role as a CDM coordinator. And the same with the principal designer. In their role as a principal designer, I don't think they can eliminate risks, but they can encourage the design team to eliminate risks by identifying them and then giving some solutions. So have you thought about you guys who are going to be maintaining the plant and fall off the roof? Oh no, we haven't. What can we do? Well, you could do this, this or this. And then the design team collectively will make a decision about what it is they want to do, given the other constraints that they've got on them. Designer's duties, just as before, it's not health and safety in an ivory tower, it's health and safety alongside other considerations. Fitness, purpose, aesthetics, environmental impact, sustainability, cost, time, etc. So it's not an absolute health and safety, it's taken alongside those other considerations. And then the principal designer controlling those risks through the subsequent design process is just as baffling as it is with the designers. Ensure the designer's CDM performance. Now, we've got a bit of a problem here. Sorry to burden you with a problem. CDM coordinator had to take all reasonable steps to ensure that designers complied with their duties under the regulations. Regulation 11.4 says that in fulfilling their duties under Regulation 11.1, the principal designer must ensure that the designers comply with their duties under the regulations. So that seems to be quite straightforward. It seems to be an absolute duty, because it says ensure. The Health and Safety Executive has said, yes, but it's not, because it's qualified by Regulation 11.1, which is carried out so far as reasonably practicable. But Regulation 11.4 isn't Regulation 11.1c. For me, it's not a subordinate regulation, it's a separate regulation. in its own right. Reconstruction lawyers have said that their interpretation of Regulation 11.4 is it's an absolute duty, which is great. You know, designers were doing good stuff, but they could raise their game. The principal designer's in there with a little bit more responsibility to make sure they do what they're supposed to do. The Health and Safety Executive said that's a mistake. When they drafted it, they wanted to draft it as a qualified duty, but somehow it got through as an absolute duty. And they've written in L153, which is only guidance, it's not an ACOP, it's only guidance, and we all know the states of guidance, don't we? That's what we do, day in and day out. They've said in L153 that it's a qualified duty, and therefore the lawyers are saying, whilst it's written as an absolute duty, because the HSC has said in L153 it's a qualified duty, it's a qualified duty. So sadly for me, where I thought CDM in 2015 might be putting a little bit more pressure on designers through the principal designer role to up their game, actually what's happened is the obligations on the principal designer are less onerous to ensure that designers do what the designers are supposed to do. And I think that's a great loss. In short, the principal contractor has the information that they need to prepare the construction phase plan, the same as the duties of the CDM coordinator. So the principal designer's duties are in Regulation 11, but then there's an additional regulation, Regulation 12, which is about the documents, the construction phase plan and the health and safety file. And Regulation 12 has duties for the principal designer and the principal contractor. So principal designers can't just look at one regulation, they need to also look at Regulation 8 and 11. Prepare and issue the health and safety file. Whilst they're still there on the project, they prepare and issue the health and safety file. Under CDM 1994, we used to have a health and safety file for every project. So every time you had work done on your building or structure, you would get a health and safety file. Under CDM 2007, we moved to a health and safety file for every structure. The regulations required the CDM coordinator to update the health and safety file, or when none exists, to prepare one from scratch. And that's a great position to be in. If you're trying to manage a property, and you want to say, what are the risks associated with this work? You go down to the health and safety file, and there it is. Unfortunately, CDM 2015 has moved us back to a health and safety file per project. So if you were responsible for this building, and you had the air conditioning replaced, you get another health and safety file. And then you had some rewiring done, you get another health and safety file. So if you're a client responsible for managing property, one of the things you might want to do is to write into contract that you'll see that your principal designer will take the existing health and safety file and update it. That might be problematic, but I think the principle is good. If you're trying to manage a property, you'd want to look in one place for one source of information. Otherwise you'd be going, we had the rewiring done, which health and safety file relates to the rewiring project? Where do I find the information about significant residual risks? So that's the principal designer, and I'll look in a minute in some detail about who can be the principal designer. And the last duty holder is the client, largely unchanged, but some tweaks and some slightly more extra duties. So clients have to have management arrangements and ensure there's adequate welfare on the project, just as they used to have on CDM 2007. Capability, competence has gone. Competence used to be Regulation 4 and Appendix 4. The industry apparently responded to commercially, created massive bureaucracy. Every time the agency ran a red tape challenge, every MP who had a surgery, whoever they could bend their ears off, small contractors were saying PQQ is a complete nightmare, it's wasting masses and masses of money. That was probably because clients were uninformed. So the agency have got rid of Regulation 4 and Appendix 4, and it's now Regulation 8. And Regulation 8 is just titled as General Duties. So it doesn't talk about competence, it doesn't talk about capability, which the industry is talking about, it's just titled General Duties. So the client and anybody else who appoints has to make sure that the people they appoint have the knowledge, skills and experience to carry out the work, and where they're an organisation, the organisational capability. that look like? How do you test that? You know, the industry, whilst there might have been 35 or 40 different PQQ schemes, I think the industry had kind of got their head around what they look like, and now we've moved from a very structured position of competence to knowledge, skills and experience, or organisational capability. Luckily for us, the HSE have said, don't forget there's PAS 91. PAS 91, publicly available specification, and it actually asks all the questions that Appendix 4 used to ask. So if you're a bit cynical, you might say that what the HSE has done is they've moved the burden from competence from being a statutory obligation, which the HSE were imposing upon everybody, to something that you might like to do. So if you choose to do it, it's your responsibility. You're creating massive bureaucracy. It's not the HSE's responsibility. You're creating massive bureaucracy. PAS 91, say, is a publicly available specification. That doesn't mean it's free, by the way. It's still as expensive as the British standard. It's going to be improved and become a British standard. It'll probably take about 3 or 4 years to do that. The beauty of the PAS is they're easy to change, but for some reason there's a political move to make it a British standard. Clients have to appoint principal designers and principal contractors. They have to appoint them in writing. They have to ensure their performance. That's new. It's a qualified duty again, it's not an absolute duty, but they have to ensure the performance of the principal designer and the principal contractor. How they might do that? I don't know. Provide information, just as they did before, the pre-construction information. Notification is now a client's responsibility. The threshold for notification has changed. So previously it used to be 30 days of construction work or 500 person days of construction work. The threshold is now 30 days and more than 20 workers working simultaneously, or 500 person days. How would the client know that? They might ask their design team. Actually, we think the way it's written, the client is only required to notify when they appoint their first principal contractor and re-notify when they change principal designers or principal contractors. And therefore, to find out whether the project is notifiable or not, they can just ask the contractor. And when they appoint them, then they do the notification. L153 says that people can help the client out with the notification. The client doesn't actually have to do it themselves, it's his responsibility. When you go online to do the notification, which is all supposed to be online now, you get a little bit of a problem. Under the CDM 2007 regulations, at the bottom of the notification, there were 3 declarations. There was a tick box for I declare I'm aware of my duties under the regulation. A tick box for I declare I have made the client aware of his duties under the regulations, which the CDM coordinator would use. Or I declare that I have made I'm satisfied that the client's aware of his duties under the regulations. The new form only has 2 declarations. The second declaration is I have made the domestic client aware of his duties under the regulations. The first declaration is I, the client, am aware of my duties under the regulations. So on the one hand, the agency is saying they can get people to do it for them, and on the other hand, you come across a form that you can only tick the box for if you're a client. Helpfully, underneath the box, they put 2 more boxes which says role, email address and role. So what's happening now is principal designers are ticking the box which says, as client, I'm aware of my duties under the regulations, and then they're putting their own email address in, and in the role they're putting principal designer. So everybody's not doing the form properly, but I don't think that's going to be a particular problem going forward. So that's the client's duties. Anybody want to know a little bit more about the principal designer? You're going to get to find out, so it would be good if you do. So the client has to appoint the principal designer. Who can be the principal designer? The definitions, regulation 2.1. Principal designer means the designer appointed under regulation 5.1a to perform the duties in regulations 11 and 12, to perform the duties of the principal designer. So the principal designer is the person appointed to be the principal designer. It's kind of circular definition. 5.1a, which is the client obligation. 5.1a, the client must appoint a designer with control over the pre-construction phase to be the principal designer. So let's, and a conflict where the industry meets the health and safety executive. One of the health and safety executives said, such as an architect or other competent designer. So let's look at what a designer is. A designer means any person, including a client, contractor, or other person referred to in these regulations, so any one of the duty holders, in other words, who in the course or furtherance of a business prepares or modifies a design. So a designer is a person with a badge or some training which says I'm a designer. But you can see that's A, and where there's an A, there's always a B. Somebody who arranges for or instructs any person under their control to carry out design. Same definition as CDM 2007, and in CDM 2007, as I said, we felt this control was an employer-employee relationship. So the senior partner in an architectural practice who's getting one of their members of staff to carry out the design would be the designer. But now we've messed around with the word control. Nobody knows what it means anymore in CDM terms. The role of the principal designer is to, specifically talks about health and safety, is to ensure that people address their health and safety obligations. So therefore, I would suggest to you that the principal designer, as part of their role, are going to be arranging for and instructing any person under their control to carry out the health and safety aspects of the design. So again, I think it's a slightly circular definition. There's been a lot of talk about you must be a qualified designer to be a principal designer. I don't think that's what the regulations say. So I'm going to show you 9 ways the client can appoint a principal designer. Appoint the lead designer as the principal designer. Okay? And you shouldn't leave this room today without believing that this is what the health and safety executive want. Okay? This is their intention, that the lead designer should be the principal designer, should be appointed as the principal designer. Okay? I'm going to show you 8 other ways of discharging this obligation, but this is what the health and safety executive want. They want the lead designer, whatever that is, to be the principal designer. So you're a client, you buy a piece of land, you're going to build a 6-story residential block on it, you engage an architect. The architect is the lead designer, because usually there's an architect around with the lead designer, and therefore they are the candidate to be the principal designer. Appointments have to be in writing. If not appointed, the obligation is to fall back to the client. There was a prosecution recently under CDM 2007 where that was tested. The problem you might come across as a client is the architect might say, I don't want to be the principal designer. So sort that one out. You're a financially astute client, you've seen this brownfield site, you're thinking about putting a 6-story residential block on it, but you want to run the numbers. So you go to a quantity surveyor. We'll get the quantity surveyor to run the numbers. The quantity surveyor is the only appointed designer at that stage. And therefore they're in the frame to be the principal designer. You then decide that the job's a goer, you then employ an architect, and the principal designer role passes from the quantity surveyor to the architect, because the architect will be in control. The agency don't seem to acknowledge this in L153. This building, running this building, the professional you might engage might be a building surveyor. You know, re-roofing, repainting, tarting up the windows. That's the kind of stuff that a building surveyor does. You might not have an architect involved. And therefore your principal designer, your lead designer, is going to be a building surveyor. And therefore they're in the frame to be the principal designer. It could be a highway realignment, a junction realignment. You know, we're going to put some traffic lights on Pelican. The only designer you'll have appointed is a civil structural engineer. Therefore they are the lead designer, therefore they're in the frame to be the principal designer. If you're doing the air conditioning in this building, the only designer you would appoint would be a mechanical engineer. Therefore they would be the lead designer, they would be in the frame to be the principal designer. Then we appoint the contractor. The contractor will have contractor's design portions And even if he doesn't, he will want to be in control. He will have contractor design portions. There always are contractor design portions. He'll want to be in control. He won't want the architect talking to his designers, because he wants his designers to do what he wants to do, not what the architect wants him to do. And therefore I would suggest the principal contractor is going to make a pitch to be the principal designer. Will they be in control? Yes, they will. If it's design and build, they definitely will be. It's the replacement of the air conditioning. I would suggest to you that the detailed design is going to be done by the mechanical contractor's designer. And therefore the mechanical contractor's designer will be the lead designer, and therefore they will be eligible or in the frame to be the principal designer. The job with masses and masses of temporary works, said like the Hammersmith flyover job that temporary works was reduced. It might be that the person who's leading the design process is the temporary works engineer. And therefore they would be in the frame to be the principal designer. So to suggest that it's always the architect, I'll give you that, or some other designer, is a misnomer. Okay? So that's number one way that the client can appoint the principal designer. They appoint the lead designer to do it. Whatever the lead designer needs. And it changes over time. The agency don't seem to acknowledge this explicitly, this change. The lead designer wants to take it on because they want to provide a kind of a one-stop shop to the client, but they don't have the knowledge, skills and experience. So they buy in the support of a CDM consultant, CDM advisor, design risk management advisor, principal designer advisor, you call what you like. That's number two way. The client wants the lead designer to do it because he wants single point responsibility, but he knows the lead designer doesn't have the knowledge, skills and experience. Or the lead designers just say, I'm not going to do it. I'll come to that in a minute. So the client finds a CDM consultant and nominates or novates him to the architect or other design practice. That's the lead designer. Is the project manager in control? Yeah, I would suggest the project manager is in control. So the project manager could be the lead designer. Or the project manager could therefore be the principal designer. You know, all things to all people, we're going to take the principal designer on. Actually, we recognise we don't have the knowledge, skills and experience, so we're going to buy it in. The client wants the project manager to do it, single point responsibility, it's easier for him to manage the whole affair. He names or nominates him because he knows that the principal project manager doesn't have the knowledge, skills and experience. The client can't find anybody else to do it. Or an experienced client, household names, the supermarkets, the Stanhopes, some of the developers do have the knowledge, skills and experience and want to do it themselves. Perfectly legitimate. Are they in control? Yeah, I think they are in control. No? The corner shop, I don't think the client will be up to it, but if you're a repeat client, that could be the case. They can't find anybody else to do it, so they buy in with support for a CDM consultant, because they don't have the knowledge, skills and experience. And this is number 9, and you'll note that there's a red, for those of you colourblind, there's red around that circle as well as green. Because the health and safety executive have said clients shouldn't appoint an independent principal designer. But that's their wish, that's not what the statute says. Okay? These are all, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not legally trained, but as far as I'm concerned, these are all legitimate interpretations of the statute. And what does independent mean anyway? We like independent, don't we? People with independent thought. The reason that the principal contractor role works so well in Europe is because the principal contractor is independent of the main contractor. He's not bound by the same strictures of penny pinching or euro pinching, time saving, etc. So we like independent. Yeah? If you're appointed to be the principal designer, you cannot do that job if you're independent of the design team, because you become an integrated member of the design team. And therefore, if you're taking that version of the interpretation of the word independent, then you're not independent, you're an integrated member of the design team. So you don't have to be carrying out design in another discipline on the project to be the principal designer. Okay? There's a chat around that is the case. You have to be one of the core designers to also pick up a principal designer role. That's not what the statute says. So, 9 ways for the client to appoint the principal designer. As far as I'm concerned, they're all legitimate. Will they ever be tested? Probably not. So lots and lots of detail there, but let me leave you with the thought that actually CDM, it's all about construction focus. There are some other people as well, but your focus should be on construction. That's me finished. Any questions? There is a microphone if you want to wait.